Voice of San Diego podcasts are made possible in part by Border Angels. Border Angels is out with a new podcast called Bad Hombre. Every Monday at noon, listen to a new episode with Border Angels founder Enrique Morones and guests. They'll be discussing border issues, immigration policy, hope for change, and more. Look for the Bad Hombre Border Angels podcast on Apple Podcasts or online at www.borderangels.org. Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast, where we make sense of local politics, schools, housing, public safety, the civic issues that impact the life of a San Diego resident. We break it down so you can understand it and make educated decisions.
Everything that goes into our investigative reporting, the journalists, public records requests, the data crunching, and this very show depends on the support of people like you because we're a nonprofit news organization. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to those of you listening on News Radio 600 Kogo. My name is Scott Lewis. I'm here with my friend Andrew Keats.
What's up, my man?
Much, how are you?
Happy to be here. Thrilled.
And amiga Sarah Libby.
What's up?
How are you?
Also happy to be here.
Tacos or carne asada fries? I mean, nachos or carne asada fries?
I think I'm carne asada fries. I think.
Nachos.
Good nachos.
I like both. They're both
It's a tough call.
Good
but
nachos, I think, win. It's a tough one, though.
Yeah,
I disagree.
I guess, yeah.
We've got a good show this week. We are doing a roundtable debate of sorts that I'll be managing with three different perspectives and people on the vacation rental debate. We have somebody who is for a total ban of all vacation rentals in San Diego. We have somebody who is for a compromise 90-day type tolerance, like what Barbara Bree has proposed on the San Diego City Council. And then we have somebody who wants as few restrictions as possible so that the market can develop. And that's coming up. That's going to be good. But let's start first with the big news of the week in San Diego City politics. And that's that City Councilwoman Myrtle Cole has been reelected the council president of the San Diego City Council. Now, let's just some background on this position. This position was created in 2004. It was set in motion in 2004, first started in 2006 with the implementation of the strong mayor form of government. Now, this used to be the mayor. The mayor of San Diego used to be a member of the city council and got to decide, who got to be on different committees, what issues came up on the city council. If you had a lot of city council members have ideas, but if the mayor wouldn't put it on the agenda, then it never mattered, right?
Right.
And so when the mayor became the chief executive officer of the city in charge of all the staff, then that position became the council presidency, and they added a seat onto the city council. So now there's 9 members of the city council, and every year they elect the council president. Myrtle Cole got it last year because at first she lined up support of the Republicans, right?
Right.
So there are 4 Republicans on the city council, 5 Democrats, and the 4 of them indicated they would support Myrtle Cole over her rival, David Alvarez.
Right. And so she voted for herself. With the 4 Republicans, she became council president.
Yeah. When everybody saw it in motion, some Democrats got on board right away. So that's not that clean when the vote happened. But,
right.
But that's the essence of it. So this time around, been a little different.
Mm-hmm.
You did a piece last week about how there was some pressure on her from the left.
Yeah. So basically the way this went down, the left and labor leaders specifically came to her and said, look, it's time to use this seat in the fullest extent of the power it possesses and actually to wield it. So they asked her to knock off all the Republicans from their committee chairmanships. She agreed and then told Republicans that she wouldn't, and then backed down from that and went with labor again. All that happened over the course of the last few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
As of Monday, it was still kind of up in the air whether she would go through with it, whether she would not. It was a pretty knockdown, drag out move that we don't often see in San Diego politics, although it's starting to happen more often. And then it became pretty clear once that council meeting started what was going to happen, because the public speakers were one after another labor leaders talking about how excited they were to support Myrtle Cole yet again.
So it seems like labor leaders' kind of critique in this is that the presidency isn't being used to its full extent. And it really seems like both with Myrtle Cole and with Sherry Lightner before her, the only time the council president is actually in the news is for this vote.
Yes.
Is that wrong?
No, it hasn't been like
certainly
that.
Not. Well, so I mean, Sherry Lightner didn't do anything. Yeah, you're right. Neither of them has pursued
Right.
a discernible agenda from the city council. They've, if anything, been defined by their reaction to what the mayor has pushed forward.
Exactly.
And they haven't even had a very strong reaction. One thing that they do unavoidably is that they decide who's on which committees.
Exactly. It just seems like when Todd Gloria was president, there were really bold decisions in terms of what made it to the agenda with the minimum wage and things like that. And I can't for the life of me remember one of those types of decisions being made in the last few years.
I mean, they have their prints on everything that does go forward.
Right.
But yeah, it's not nearly like the leadership. Like Scott Peters was the first council president, now Congressman Peters. And he was a big voice. He was a big leader in City Hall. He was, there was the mayor and there was the city attorney and there was the council president. And
I mean, it also matters whether you make sort of certain negotiations or concessions on the things you support, or you hold your votes together. I mean, there was a couple month stretch where Council President Todd Gloria, now Assemblyman Todd Gloria, brought forward a Barrio Logan plan that didn't secede to the concessions that were being asked of it, kept all the 5 Democratic votes together to pass it. Minimum wage, he kind of had preemptively negotiated with others to lower the number below what he had in mind, kept the 5 votes together and got that passed. Brought the linkage fee increase that had a pretty large gap that he could have raised it but lower than the maximum amount, and he raised it as much as their economic impact study said that they legally could.
mm-hmm.
Kept the 5 votes together to get it passed. So that was really leading the council, and the council taking a leading role in what was happening at the city. But to Sarah's point, that hasn't happened lately at all.
It's an extremely powerful post. Again, it's the same post that the
Can
mayor
be.
had. Yeah, that the mayor had before. And so this comes to a climax on Monday. And Republican councilman.
Let me just add the committees. The committee assignments matter in that because you can bring work through the committees.
Mm-hmm.
So who's in charge of committees determines what work those committees will do over the course of a year. And for instance, one of the committee assignments she was going to knock off was Scott Sherman, who made a lot of news in all media about being on the head of the Smart Growth and Land Use Committee, and along with David Alvarez, the vice chair, bringing kind of a bold housing agenda through the city. So this was exactly one of the committee chairmanships that was potentially going to be lost in this, in essence, power grab.
Yeah, so he asks her about some assurances he'd received that he'd be able to keep this job. He loves this. This is the one thing he seems to like doing, which is pushing for housing with his buddy David Alvarez, right?
Right.
So this is the scene at the San Diego City Council on Monday when that hit a climax.
You put out a memo a few days ago with listing your intentions of keeping the committee chairs intact and listed all the different chairmanships and where you wanted to be, and that's a very important part of what the council president does. Can you say on the record today that it's your intention to stick with your written word and keep those committee assignments where they are?
We're going to discuss that after council, this vote here.
It was just really an awkward moment. Like, that thing I wrote that said you'd keep this thing you want. We'll talk about it.
We've got time to do that.
I do that with
so lunch is coming up, and then after lunch it'll be the afternoon. That's not going to work for me. There's supper time and the late after. I
do that with my kids.
Tomorrow's wild. Tomorrow's going to be a crazy day.
When my kids want to play like Battleship or something, which I know is going to be like an hour on the floor with them, it's like, can we play it now? It's like, oh, well, I got to do the dishes for a second. And
Yeah, it's like this really weird tension between like we're in the council meeting where I'm making this big power grab, and yet like this couldn't be the time or the place to discuss any of that.
Right. Well, and so she's like, we don't have that here, but like she's fumbling for the explanation of why this couldn't possibly be the time to have this discussion.
Exactly.
And the city attorney comes to her defense and is like, that discussion item isn't docketed for right now. That's docketed for
There
next
you go.
week.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's when he just says, all right, I've heard enough. Don't worry about it.
Well, and that's, I mean, what she was presented with was a choice. I mean, the labor leaders and Democratic activists had a point, right? If she didn't do what they wanted, they could have threatened her reelection in a way. They could have rallied for her opposition, not reelection as council president, her reelection.
Yeah, she's running for office. Yeah.
And she made, I think, what's a pretty understandable, logical decision that might as well go with them. They have a majority. You don't need these 4 Republicans to do this. And if they're gonna press their power, what's going to happen? And so now we'll watch and see exactly what she does to those committees. Things looks like she's probably going to boot Sherman from that job, right?
Yeah, and probably also Lori Zaff from Economic Development Committee as well. The other thing is like, you're allowed to do this. This is by the rules.
Yeah.
Right.
Just own what you're doing.
Exactly.
It's the very same thing that when Mayor Faulkner vetoed out the budget, canceling some of their council budgets and projects in their districts after they refused to support his convention center or special election for a convention center. Like that was within your authority. You can do it. It's fine. Just own that you've decided to play rough, which is a fine thing to do.
I think it does. It is another step in the further like sort of polarization of the council in the sense of, the Democrats have always controlled this seat since it was started, but it always had like a comity, the Republicans just would help choose the Democrat they pursued, not necessarily just like line up for one that would pick off from the coalition.
Yeah, there's no question that it's as far as legislative bodies go, they've always gotten along pretty well. That floor has always been, they disagree on things, but they're basically, but like Council President Todd Gloria, we just talked about how he pursued an agenda of sorts, but Republicans always had committee seats under him as well.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot to watch there. I guess, she took that job again and now has pledged more action on homelessness, and it's the same sort of speech she gave last year. So we'll see. Standing offer remains for her to come onto the great Voice of San Diego podcast platform. And
Still haven't heard. Just waiting.
And maybe we can check in with her about her priorities. All right, so homelessness is just not going away. It's got to be the most important thing that comes up all the time at any community meeting or the city council, again, to find the council president. We did a story this week about, Lisa Halverstadt did a story about 17th Street in East Village. So 17th Street had become really the main street of the homeless encampments, right? The tent cities, as we called them, up and down 17th Street in East Village. Obviously a place also known for drug activity, it's just a rough place, right? And what Lisa and what everybody noticed in September, there was this incredible crackdown, and police descended on the area and have totally cleared it out. And to this day, it's totally cleared out. What does it feel like over there? I mean, it's eerie.
It's very eerie. Yeah.
And so she went, and I thought it was a great idea to just go find out where everybody went. And it seems like most of the people that we can find went to jail. That not necessarily the majority of people there. We haven't nailed down exactly how many were there and moved out.
When you keep seeing people sleeping near you go to jail, you might just go somewhere else voluntarily.
Exactly.
So we tracked 75 people who were arrested, many of them jailed, and about 1/4 of the people arrested were never charged with a crime. So some of them went to jail and have not been charged with a crime. Let's just let that settle in. Basically, and then a lot of them ended up with restrictions that said you cannot go back to this area or you'll be arrested again.
Yeah, and on top of the people who weren't charged, some of them, I think most of the people who were caught up in this sweep were charged with something like blocking the right of way, something to do with being homeless on 17th Street, encroachment. Those are the types of charges. And then they ended up having that dropped because police discovered like, oh, you have a previous drug charge and we'll just go with that. Mm-hmm. So even of the people who were charged, they weren't necessarily charged with the reason the police interacted with them in the first place, which was being homeless on 17th Street.
Right.
Yeah, they didn't know going in that was a person who had some outstanding drug charges.
They had or some other kind of warrant. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the decision was made at the highest levels of the city to clear that area out and to put some of them in jail. I mean, and
or probably just by any means necessary.
Yeah, get them out, and jail was an option. But we're seeing this kind of interesting shift. Then they went from the streets to the criminal justice system, and also spread out throughout the city. So Lisa did a great job tracking down some people who ended up in different parts of the city, still living on the street. And that's what we've heard from Balboa Park, from North Park, from Hillcrest, and other places that these people didn't just disappear. So a really great reporting, and it corresponds with a big national story. The Associated Press came in and did a big piece about San Diego and its image. It's called the most vulnerable the headline was "Most Vulnerable Dying in America's Finest City." In a place that bills itself as America's finest city, renowned for its sunny weather, surfing, fish tacos, spiraling real estate values have contributed to spiraling homelessness, leaving more than 3,200 people living on the streets and in their cars. Of course, nothing in this piece by Julie Watson is stuff we don't know. But to see it all packaged like that for a national audience was just brutal.
Yeah, it is. It was interesting because you just see the statistic after statistic, revelation after revelation that have otherwise dripped out in a number of stories over the last 6 or 8 months. Being pulled in one place really does draw a damning picture of what's happened in the East Village. And
Sarah, did you appreciate the fish taco reference?
I was just going to point that out. So, despite this being a very good, comprehensive story, it's really a pet peeve of mine, not just the fish taco thing, but that writers have this, way of suggesting that, these stereotypes about a city can't coexist with bad things also happening. So
the existence of fish tacos
means that there can't possibly be homeless people. I was reading an LA Times story, and it was really wonderful LA Times story about somebody who had escaped the fire and had actually heroically saved his neighbor's belongings. And then at the very end of the story, it said he went and got an $11 probiotic smoothie. And it was just kind of all ruined, these stupid Angelinos and their fancy smoothies. Yeah. And that dichotomy really bothers me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, San Diego's always had kind of a rough side. I mean, when my dad was here for the Navy, downtown wasn't known as a tourist destination. I mean, this America's Finest City thing, she must have written that 8 times. It is a good knock on. I can see why it's a vehicle, but yeah, we have vast poverty. We have lots of housing troubles and border troubles and sewage troubles and all kinds of things. It's just, it's that dichotomy is an interesting one that everybody seems to obsess on.
One of the other things that I think she picked up on was the extent to which this is at odds with the image of San Diego as a tourism destination.
Yeah. Yeah.
And more specifically, the damage that this is doing to the city's image as a tourism destination. I think, Scott, you said this sometime in the office this week, it's been since Enron by the Sea that a sustained negative portrayal of this city has made it into the national consciousness, and that has happened. That's no longer a hypothetical scenario about what may happen with this hepatitis A situation. That's happened.
Yeah. So in 2004 it was, Enron had just exploded, and the New York Times ran a story about San Diego and its financial troubles at City Hall as being Enron by the Sea in the big headline, and that thing it was in countless articles after that. It was talked about at countless panels. It was everybody talked about that was our image around the country. Well, this is bigger. the Hepe homeless crisis now feels like it could stain San Diego in a way that it's one thing if your municipal government isn't functioning well. It's another thing if people think of you as teeming with homelessness and disease. Like that's just really bad.
Absolutely. I think, like over Thanksgiving, people have people coming to town and like, hey, should I get shots? And, what neighborhood should I stay in to protect myself? That's really like, it's pervaded.
For instance, it might be difficult to imagine a family from Arizona making their summer vacation plans and saying, should we go to SeaWorld? And then somebody else saying, no, they've committed white-collar crimes there.
Yeah.
But you might hear but they might, in fact, change.
They didn't disclose their bond documents properly.
Have you heard what they were doing with their CAFR? Probably not. But 20 people have died because of unsanitary conditions in an outbreak that no one has seen in this country in decades. Might give you pause to come here for Legoland.
Yeah, two things. So it does look like the deaths have started that downward trend. Hopefully things and they only had like 5 new cases of the disease in the latest count. So things seem to be going better on that point. Also on the homelessness and housing front, we got news today that Tony Atkins has been got the votes to become the new leader of the California Senate. So she goes from being the Speaker of the Assembly to now the leader of the California Senate. Big post.
First person in almost 150 years to serve both those roles, assuming this holds until a January vote.
Yeah, so also first woman, right? And
first woman, first openly gay leader to serve as Senate leader. So all kinds of firsts.
So fascinating there. She was responsible for a big push for funding for affordable housing in the last session of the Senate. We'll see what she tries to do with this thing. All right, again, stay tuned. We're going to do our hero and goat on the second part of this show. We're also going to have this debate discussion about vacation rentals. Also, this is the middle of our big donations push at the Voice San Diego. Every year, at the end of the year, we push really hard to get as much into our bank account as we can so we can keep paying people. Raise about like a third of our funding just in these last few weeks of the year. It's pretty intense. So please go to voicesandiego.org/donate. And again, stay tuned for a discussion about vacation rentals. I think it's going to be a fascinating one. This has been done in partnership with our friends and partners at News Radio 600 Kogo. Sponsoring the podcast today is Sempra Services. Greenhouse gas emissions impact us all. In this new podcast series, former San Diego County Planning Commissioner and renewable energy and transportation expert Peter Norby explores best practices for reducing greenhouse gases and making real progress toward a healthier future on the local level. In this episode, Norby sits down with a renowned economist and Point Loma Nazarene professor, Dr. Lynn Reeser, to discuss the implications of government-controlled energy in San Diego. Visit sempraservices.com to learn more and tune into the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. All right, we're back in studio. This is Scott Lewis. I'm here with my friend Andrew Keats and Sarah Libby, and we are going to do our hero of the week.
This preemptively goes to the newest San Diego Padre.
I love this.
Shohei Ohtani. He is the phenom prospect, the Japanese Babe Ruth, the man who is going to deliver us to the World Series championship, who's going to remake Major League Baseball in San Diego's image. Sports in general.
San Diego sports will be defined by this man.
And I think he made the right decision.
Now, remember, literally all he had to do to become hero of the week was not eliminate San Diego as a possible landing place.
Which, as of our taping, he has not done.
So thank you.
We have made good on that.
That's how dark San Diego has been.
Heroic.
Welcome.
Is that just not eliminating us as a possible landing spot is buoyed us this much.
If I may,
if
he is going to make his decision and it's not going to be San Diego, at least just delay it as long as possible. I just want to let us live in this moment a little bit longer.
All right. Our goat of the week.
You lose. Good day, sir.
All right, this is going to go to the city of San Diego for not fixing its sidewalk liability policy. It's still just dogging the city. This was brought into focus by the most San Diego possible story that exists. So San Diego Mayor former San Diego Mayor Roger Hedgecock, he left office in disgrace. The number of San Diego attributes of this story is incredible. Hedgecock became, you guys weren't around when he was a big deal in local media. He was a big-time talk show host after that, really defined a lot of politics. Pretty right-wing populist for the city, had his own nuances on that sort of thing. Got pulled into national politics after that. His wife, Cynthia Hedgecock, was walking in Pacific Beach and tripped on the sidewalk, blamed the city for what became a rupture in her breast implants, and won the lawsuit. She won $85,000 from the city for pain and suffering because of this. And there could not possibly be a more symbolic story of the problem with the sidewalk, but also of just San Diego. Infrastructure failure.
Yeah. And to remind those who might not have been with us 3 years ago when Liam Dillon, now with the Los Angeles Times, was a full-time sidewalk reporter at Voice of San Diego. The insanity of San Diego sidewalk policy is that the way it is structured right now, we maintain liability for the state of sidewalks. So, for instance, when somebody trips and falls and ruptures their breast implant, that is a liability that falls on the city of San Diego. But the cost of maintaining and keeping the responsibility to maintain the sidewalks actually falls on individual property owners. So property owners have no real incentive to maintain their sidewalk because they're not liable. And though we're liable, it is not our responsibility to maintain the sidewalks.
So while that is an insane thing and policy that needs to be fixed, the one thing that Liam didn't have in his weeks and months of trying to drive this home was like a high-profile ruptured breast implant story to drive this home.
And really,
and now it's finally arrived.
And no one appreciated a revealing anecdote quite as much as Mr. Liam Dillon.
We really would have been an important part of his narrative. So yes, this from the UT story. The city attorney Mara Elliott actually found herself trying to argue that the breast implants needed to be replaced anyway.
Ugh.
Now, look, here's what gets me also about this story is Roger Hedgecock would have been vicious to this story.
If this was just like a random person that
it would have been one of those rants on
like hot coffee.
Yeah, like where you pause for like 3 seconds to like let it sit in and stuff like that.
Where you don't even actually formulate an argument, you just change the voice in which you state it, exactly and that's supposed to convey the absurdity of it.
Would have just tore into it.
Oh, your breast implant?
The sound effect.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's bring our panelists in to talk about this. This issue is going to be hashed out at San Diego City Council next week. All right, we are joined in the great Voice of San Diego podcast studio, the most important, most classy, most luxurious podcast studio in downtown San Diego by far, I think, by a great collection of different perspectives and people with perspectives about a major issue that the San Diego City Council is going to be dealing with next week. So I'm going to introduce everybody, and then we're going to go around and start a good conversation about what to do and what the city should do about short-term vacation rentals and what kind of restrictions, regulations, or outright bans we should impose. So to my right now is Tom Coate. Tom is formerly of Save San Diego Neighborhoods and now part of a group that he's helped form called Neighborhoods for Residents, right?
Correct.
All right. And Tom has been involved in this. He was actually on the podcast a couple years ago about this, right?
I was.
Yes. A wonderful experience. Right? Yeah.
It's great. And, you know, this whole vacation rental issue experience has actually been very rewarding in a way you get to meet a lot of nice people.
Oh, good. Yeah. Civic activation has certainly happened with a lot of different neighborhoods. All right. Sue Hopkins, she's a resident. She's provided a lot of data to some of the groups working on this issue, in particular those hoping for pretty strong restrictions on the vacation rental market. Sue, welcome.
Thank you for having me today.
Thank you. And Belinda Smith. Belinda has operated a short-term vacation rental and helped create the Short-Term Rental Alliance.
That's correct. Yes.
And Belinda's been a long-time reader and also active in this issue. And thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
And John Anderson. John is a North Park self-described homemaker who's also been active. He also helped create the Short-Term Rental Alliance. John, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, so let's start. I'm going to start with Tom. So we have a discussion coming up next week. There are a number of proposals on the table, but the status quo right now is that the San Diego City Attorney several months ago issued a memo and she said that short-term vacation rentals are not in the city code as a zoning description and thus should be prohibited or are de facto prohibited. And she said, very open, that she did that in part to spur the city council to finally deal with this issue with the mayor. It didn't necessarily have that effect. The city council's swung and missed a few times trying to get this solved, the ultimate solution with this. And so she... it's now coming back. And so there are a couple of proposals on the table and then a couple from the staff. One of them, and you guys can jump in if I get this wrong, one of them is from Barbara Bree, city councilwoman, represents the North Coastal area, the La Jolla area, and she has proposed something, a lot of different parts. One of the main parts is that you can rent your whole home out, but only for a maximum 90 days a year. You have to be primary resident of that home, and a few other aspects like that. Another proposal from 4 city council members, including David Alvarez, Chris Ward, Mark Kersey, and Scott Sherman, would propose no limit on the 90 days type thing, but it would require a 3-night minimum stay and some pretty heavy fines, or not fines, and enforcement actions and permitting requirements. Tom, you, I think, would be on the side of pushing for this compromise, as it's called, that Barbara Breeze floated. Can you tell us why?
Sure. I'm pushing for a compromise. And the simple answer is that you're very correct in that Mara Elliott, the city attorney, on March 15th, issued her memo saying that the code did not permit these in residential areas. However, the mayor at that time said, look, I'm not going to enforce this. I'm going to wait until there's city council direction. And there was a meeting scheduled October 23rd that was postponed a few days before. So we meet on Tuesday on this issue again. I'm pushing for a compromise. I would hope, and after talking extensively with council members, that Barbara Bree's proposal is used as the foundation for that compromise. But I really don't care. In the sense that I just want a compromise that is good for San Diego. If it comes from the Chris Ward proposal being ratcheted down, that's okay. If it comes from the Barbara Bree proposal being ratcheted down and made acceptable to a majority of the council, that's good. Mm-hmm. I think that there is going to be action this time, that the council is not going to kick this issue down the road again.
Yeah, so Chris Ward has kind of emerged as the leader of that 4-group council coalition that said the more permissive restriction. Now, how would he ratchet that down in a way that would be acceptable to you?
He has to get rid of that investor-friendly provision. It's provision F in his proposal, which right now says that investors with some loose restrictions can invest in up to 3 properties, and a permit holder can operate 3 vacation rental properties. The reason that has so alarmed city councils that I'm working with from Sorrento Valley to Ocean Beach is that it will invite a floodgate of investors from around the world that has grown up because vacation rentals are such a good business. They're so lucrative. There's an investor class around the world. And the UT editorial board had it right. In October, it said, investors are looking at San Diego homes as, quote, gold mines. So we need to save strike a balance that saves our residential neighborhoods.
John, let's turn to you. What would you say that balance is as somebody who is involved in what's called the sharing economy?
The balance in terms of the proposals on the table?
What would be an ideal balance?
I think the most important thing for our group, for me personally, as well as many of other members and supporters, is that we want clarity. And I think that's true for both sides. I think that's been the cause of the most frustration. And whether it's clarity from the city attorney's office, where the previous two had one position, the current had a different position, or just the rules themselves, there's a lot of gray area. And I think it's hard to dispute that part. So like Tom said, we hope there will be action on Tuesday. We'll see if that's the case or not. But we're supporting the compromise by Alvarez, Ward, Kersey, and Sherman. I think it shows that there's, from both sides of the political aisle, support for this measure. Alvarez and Sherman in particular have been addressing a number of issues related to housing this year. It's been a focus for both of their offices. And I think this is part of that. It's an economic opportunity for young families like myself. It can be a lucrative business opportunity, as Tom mentions. I think that primarily that is for long-term time owners from Prop 13 and other rules that allow them to make a lot of money. They might have had a long-term rental and then converted it. But I live in North Park, and nobody's coming into North Park to buy a 2-bedroom house for $550,000 and making any money long-term or short-term. And so for my position, I started out in this issue because we had a grandma flat behind my house. I was staying at home with our 2 young kids. I still stay at home. We're expecting our 3rd next year. And I have many other friends that are in the same position, buying their first house in Bay Ho, Ocean Beach, etc. And so that's a critical thing for them to be able to get into a home. And if they want to rent a spare room, a grandma flat, their home when they're away, I think that is a huge opportunity. And especially in a place like San Diego with so much demand, it's really meaningful.
Okay. Now, Sue, I think you might represent a perspective of we shouldn't allow these whole home rentals in particular around the city. Is that true or fair?
I think that enforcement is going to be very difficult with whole home rentals. But, what I really want to say here is I disagree with Tom. I don't think we're ready to make a decision on Tuesday.
Really?
One of the things that we've been talking about is numbers over and over again. How many short-term vacation rentals are there? What kind of impacts do they have, not only on the neighborhoods and the neighbors, but just in general? And, it took the voice of San Diego and Lisa Halverstad to reach out to host compliance, which, of course, is just one source of information. Mm-hmm. And we just got the data yesterday. It's very recent. Nobody's had a chance to assess it. And we're going to make decisions that are going to affect all of us in San Diego.
Yeah, let me describe this real quick. So we did ask Host Compliance, which has worked with other cities, to sort of get this kind of baseline data about how many vacation rentals there are. They surveyed it, and the hard part about this is, you can look at Airbnb, but somebody might, advertise their home on Airbnb and then on these other services as well. And so, you can't just add all that up. And so what they did is dedupe that, but then they also did an analysis of like how many of them had stayed longer or had rented out their places for periods that totaled longer than 90 days of the year. And 90 days is an important threshold, of course, with that proposal, and found that 22% of the homes were being rented out for longer than 90 days. So 9,000 in the city of San Diego, and then 22%. And then, of course, some neighborhood numbers too. So Uptown, 840 whole home rentals, Mission Beach and Pacific Beach, both about 1,500 each. So a lot of places, but again, really understanding this data is going to take some time, especially on the neighborhood level. They've made their whole report open. So you don't even want to push right now for a total restriction.
I just don't think we're ready to do anything.
Now,
as painful a statement as that is for everybody, you mentioned 22% of whole home rentals that are rented for longer than 90 days. So those aren't available for people to rent. And that's a minuscule number of the total number of rental unit or the total number of housing units in San Diego. But when you have a vacancy rate that's 2.73%, which is the last vacancy rate that I saw published in the Union Tribune, that means there are less than 15,000 units for people to rent. So now you have 2,000 that are whole home rentals.
Yeah.
Compared to 15,000. And that's a lot bigger proportion. And the growth rate is what's really concerning. And I think it should also concern John and Belinda, because what's happening is that investors are into the market and they're pushing out people like John. I mean, the regulations that are going to be proposed are going to hurt people who are just renting out their spare room. It's going to hurt people that are renting out their granny flat or one property.
Let's go Belinda and then Tom.
Well, just to comment on what Sue's saying, she's, sorry, I have a little cold. She's making really good points, but I would say that San Diego had a housing problem long before Airbnb, long before. And it's one of the reasons I had to wait out the whole bubble. We had a huge bubble in San Diego, just, what are we in, 2017, just within the last decade, we've crashed and now we're going up again. And there's obviously a housing issue. And I love numbers. John loves numbers. I think we all agree that numbers are needed. And I believe that part of this proposal on Tuesday does actually say that if we get somewhere, a study will be included. I don't know if that's still on the table. Maybe, John, you can confirm. But the city would be required to do a study because we do agree with you, Sue, and we are concerned about it. I think John and I are very strong community advocates, and we want to know what do the numbers say. So.
Tom?
Yeah, but my point on the
This Tom Coat.
yes, going ahead on the decision on Tuesday, that might not be my personal preference, but that is what is going to happen. I do not believe the council has the will to delay this, and I'd also say that along with Belinda's point, the city attorney has told me and that she is going to ask for a mandatory sunset review of this. Whatever ordinance is passed in a year, so we get the studies that Sue and Belinda are talking about, and then can come back and revisit in a year when we have more data that should have already been done but hasn't.
Sue, let me ask you something. I know you want to add a point. One of the things that's been hard for me in this debate is I care deeply about the housing costs and housing affordability for people. It's something we talk about a lot, about housing supply. And I'm worried that it's just a convenient argument for some people who are opposed to vacation rentals, and they're otherwise not necessarily concerned about housing supply, but they pull it out for this thing that is a really compelling issue. And I'm not attacking you. I don't know what what your concerns are on other things, but what would you say to somebody who might bring that concern back to you?
Well, it's an argument that you can't regulate a few bad apples out of. So, if it is contributing to a housing shortage, I think it is a pretty compelling one. And I would just respond to Belinda to say that I don't think short-term vacation rentals are the sole source of the problem by any means, right? And I'm in no means mean to portray it as that, but it certainly doesn't help. And I think the growth rates are alarming. And where I started thinking about housing is that my technician and my postdoc couldn't find a place to live in San Diego. Mm-hmm. Postdoc, this guy has a PhD, moves back to San Diego, ends up living in somebody's kid's bedroom, a colleague's kid's bedroom for 2.5 months because he can't find a place to live in San Diego. And this is somebody who's educated. I mean, he makes like to think he makes a reasonable salary. He might tell you differently. But he ended up not having his own place, sharing with somebody else, and living in an area that he didn't want to live in because it was so hard for him to find a place to live. And so then I started paying attention to vacancy rates and what percentage of whole house rentals were of vacant properties. Now, of course, nobody's saying that these would all magically, if we outlawed them tomorrow, that they would magically go back into the long-term rental market.
Yeah, I think so we heard from Jonah Mechanic. He runs Share San Diego and manages a bunch of properties. And his argument was especially on the coast, and he said he couldn't speak for the middle part of the mid-city area or uptown. His point was that they have a bunch of people who own a home in the coast, and they come and use it maybe once or twice a year. And now they've been released to, now they have these platforms that they can manage and rent them out during this time. But if that was removed, they wouldn't actually just put those on the market. They just wouldn't have anybody in them. And so, I mean, that was his argument, sort of countering that, like, all this would suddenly flood into the market as affordable housing, or at least housing supply. He said, no, that's not true. They would just be staying there, at least on the coast.
Well, how does he know?
Okay.
Show me the data, baby. You
Okay.
know, I'd really like to see a citation. How does he know that's the case?
I'd love to know how many houses are just sitting empty. Long-term rentals, short-term rentals, inherited houses. Like, how many houses are just sitting empty at this point? And maybe should those people be paying some sort of tax or fine for having an empty house in a city that needs housing?
That's a very interesting point that you make. In Vancouver, the city of Vancouver, British Columbia, where the vacancy rate is less than 1%, they actually have a vacant home tax.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Because what was happening is investors from overseas, particularly China, have been looking for a place to park their money. They park it in Vancouver real estate, which has always been subject to huge bubbles and inflation. And the city of San Diego, or of Vancouver, invoked this vacant housing tax. But they also put severe restrictions on Airbnb type short-term rentals because of the housing issues in Vancouver.
Let me ask you and get your thoughts on something. So when I talk to people who are worried about vacation rentals, and in full disclosure, some of them are my parents, and they live in Pacific Beach, and there's just a feeling, whether grounded or not, that the neighborhood is close to a tipping point where the neighborhood will no longer be a neighborhood for residents, but that it'll be more economical, it will make more sense economically, and it will also make more sense just by the way things are in the neighborhood for everybody to be vacation rentals, and that critical mass will sort of pour in. Now, the response to that is, well, look, the economics don't work out. At some point, the value of these properties is going to hit a point where you just can't add more supply. But that's what they're concerned about. And when you hear somebody say that, John, what do you respond with?
Are you thinking specifically in terms of like the coastal communities? Is that kind
I
of where you're
think
coming from?
I mean, we found a street in sort of this Grant Hill area that was almost all vacation rentals, and they were advertising, partying fully explicitly. And I think that's the worry, right? Like, that's the deep, dark worries that they're just going to lose their neighborhood. And I mean, what would you say to them?
Yeah, you want to keep the authenticity. You want to put locals first. And I think Barcelona is a good example of, they cracked down on short-term rentals in a major way. And it was mostly about the culture and it being for people from there, et cetera. Mostly in terms of the concern that you have. It's all for tourists, whether they're from the UK or wherever else it is. There's a lot of people that want to go visit Barcelona, similar to San Diego. Great climate, great culture, great weather, and a really inviting environment as well. We're culturally open. We invite people here from Mexico, Latin America, as well as Asia. We're on two borders here. My take on that is that it definitely is an issue, and especially in areas that have very high demand and very low capacity to grow. And so I think in San Diego, that describes to a T our coastal communities. We essentially in 1971 put in the height limit. There's been a bit of growth since then, but people want OB to be what OB was in the 70s. And I love OB. It was the first place I lived when I moved here. I'll probably move back there at some day. The vibe is amazing. The beaches are amazing. It's its own thing, and it's awesome. But if you think that Ocean Beach is not going to follow the rest of coastal California from Eureka all the way down to San Diego and being very desirable and increasingly the realm of millionaires, I think whether short-term rentals are here or not, that is in the cards more than likely. You can't have workforce housing when most of the lots are a 1,000 square foot cottage. There's just too much demand for that very appealing asset. And whether that's nationally in the U.S., where we have free movement of 330 million people, or movement from around the world.
What you're arguing is that if we had a lot more supply of homes on the coast, then you could have vacation rentals and it wouldn't be such a big part of the community.
I guess I'm trying to I'm not trying to exclude the short-term rental thing. I think that's part of it. But I'm saying that coastal California is very desirable, especially in San Diego. And it's going to be hard for it to keep the community character without adding what we call today workforce housing or affordable housing. And I think there's very little appetite for that. And where there is appetite, it's very hard to build that, or there's other oppositions that make it not feasible.
Okay. Tom?
Yeah, John's hit on a good point, and that is that this is part of an overall housing crisis and an issue in San Diego that's been going on for now 15 years. But when we went in fact, we had meetings yesterday with several of the council members, and the tipping point question, the balance is what we're looking at here with communities. One of the people of our group that went in is the chair of the Mission Bay cluster of schools. We've had to close an elementary school, Bayview Terrace, in Pacific Beach. We've had to have 7 straight years of declining school enrollments throughout San Diego Unified School Districts. They are now tying that in part to vacation rentals. Not all of it, but
Tom, I'm sorry. I have to interrupt you, because didn't that elementary school close years ago?
No, that closed in 2013, Bayview Terrace. And the thing with the vacation rental effect is in Crown Point, Pacific Beach, and one part of Mission Beach, there are 1,634 whole home vacation rentals in that area. If half of them were homes where children lived and attended the schools, they would not only not have to have closed that elementary school, they could open another one. So that's a critical point when you're talking about the viability of a community. And the assistant economic developer, Laguna Beach, when they were debating this up there, she said, look, we're a world-renowned area. We could vacation rent every home in the city. There is that much demand. So somewhere there has to be a balance.
I think there is some truth to that. There's also some context. I mean, Mission Bay High School simply wouldn't be there and wouldn't be viable, and hasn't been viable for the last, going back since I've been here, since 2004, 5, 6, because 80% of the people are bussed in because there just isn't the population of kids there. So again, it's not a news story, but there also aren't kids in Pacific Beach and Mission Beach. I mean, there are older folks like my parents, and then there are a lot of younger people exploring their lives. Belinda, did you want to respond?
Yeah, Sue and I were talking out in the green room before we came in here, and we were talking about how on her street, people moved in years ago and just don't move away. So you don't have that housing turnover. And then we're talking about very high prices. So young families like John or mine's, we don't have that opportunity to live at the beach. I mean, this is a complex issue. It's just, there's a lot of challenges, but again, to Sue's point, like, let's get the data, let's get some trend lines going. Let's look at what we can see over the course of 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and let's try to decide, okay, well, maybe in 5 years, we'll consider looking at some sort of restriction in certain neighborhoods because it doesn't make sense to keep allowing this. I get that. I totally get that. But at the same time, I'm very concerned that, part of this home ownership is the American dream. Bottom line, and me being able to do what I want with my home is a big part of my happiness, my prosperity, my life. And I get concerned when people start trying to draw that line and deciding for me, what's okay, what isn't. I'm good with investors having a limit of 3. I think 3 is a great limit.
But all of local government is, in essence, a restriction on what you can do with your home.
Yes, I'm not asking to have naked parties in the front garden, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time,
I've got those on my street.
Well, yes, you do. I have heard about this. But so let's get rid of those bad actors. Let's have regulation that allows Sue to pick up the phone and get rid of them.
So Sue, that's the primary argument of the regulators, is saying, like, let's permit it, but let's pay a fee to create a revenue stream that we can use to pay people because right now your only option is to call code enforcement for some things about the property, and then call the police for noise. But if the police don't respond, if it's not necessarily too loud or whatever, you're out of luck. And so some communities have like vacation rental patrol cars and stuff that go around. Like, why not start something like that here?
So we're talking about changing the municipal code. Once you change the municipal code, the Coastal Commission is involved. It's going to be very difficult then a year, 2 years, 5 years from now, if you have a problem, to get a do-over. Mm-hmm. Okay? So why are we making a change when we don't have a full data set? Why has the city council just not spent any time or energy? I mean, at best, it's overwork or laziness, if I'm going to be charitable. And at worst, it's willful ignorance of the facts. I mean, is there a part of you that doesn't want the decision to go forward because it looks like it might be more permissive than you want? Well, certainly, I think if Chris Ward's proposal passes, it's not just 3 per investor. You know, if you're a family of 5, mom and dad and 3 kids, you could have 15 short-term vacation rental properties.
Describe to me what is happening in your neighborhood.
Well, as Belinda said, everybody moved into my neighborhood between 1959 and 1961 when the houses
what neighborhood
were.
Is this?
I'm in Clairemont.
Okay, yeah.
When their houses were new.
Yeah.
And then they never left until they died.
Which is a phenomenon across the coast
Sure.
with the Prop 13, and
Sure.
people just don't want to move from these opportunities.
But then the parents passed away,
Yeah.
and the kids inherited the property, and they pay $900 a year
Yeah,
in property tax.
because you can inherit your property tax level from your
Right.
parents. Yeah.
And so they pay $900 a year in property tax on their property, and they short-term rent it. And there was no discussion with anybody in the neighborhood. The first thing we knew was there was a party bus on the street.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had weddings, bachelor parties, a lot of events. But even when you don't have events, you have people getting up for a red-eye flight who are incapable of unlocking their rental car without beeping the horn. And they're in and out of the car like 25 times, packing up. And each time, because they're afraid Clairemont's a little sketchy, they lock the car, then they unlock the car. Yeah. They sit in the backyard, and on some random Tuesday night, having a glass of wine, kicking back. It doesn't matter that it's midnight and the neighbors next door have to be up at 5 a.m. to go to work.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's that kind of steady drip disturbance.
Tom?
Yeah, if I could, when I got involved in this about 3 years ago, my sole reason for being involved was the noise and nuisance issue. And I think that Chris Ward's proposal and Barbara Bree's proposal both are going to do very good things in a couple of regards. It's going to put San Diego on track for an effective noise enforcement policy, because right now, as Scott said, people are so frustrated. That's the biggest complaint I hear. The non-emergency police number is totally overwhelmed. Code compliance is not a solution. They don't work late at night. So both proposals are talking about 24/7 enforcement, which I think will help everybody on this picture. Both proposals are also talking about home sharing, making it legal and giving it certainty. That's a great thing. I think that's wonderful. But the noise issue is not just about bad apples. I've lived to one of these unhosted hotels for 9 years now, and I can tell you it's people doing what people do on vacation. They aren't having a wild party. They aren't being bad. They're just out talking, 6, 8 of them, 10 of them, late at night, a few feet from your bedroom window. You cannot sleep, and it's really bad. And the one last point, cities have zoning laws to regulate rights that upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. And those rights try to protect everyone. And there is also the right of the neighbor to a peaceful home environment free from commercial enterprises. And that's often overlooked in this case. Again, let's find a balance.
Belinda?
Yeah, my neighbors have much the same complaints that Sue and Tom have, and I've chalked it up to city living. This is the nature of homes being in Mission Hills on top of each other in a canyon. Noises could amplify. We have the airport. We have the trains. We have traffic on I-5. We just have normal city living. And, in the past, I've said to them, well, that could be me coming and going. That could be me getting out of my car at 10 o'clock at night and closing the car door. And they have said, well, we don't want that. And then my response to them is, well, then move somewhere into a gated community where there are tons of rules and regulations. And there is a rule that says no one may make any kind of noise after 10 p.m. I mean, we're talking about reasonable noises too. So I did actually go to the point of investing in something called Noise Aware, which is a little component that plugs into my wall inside my home, my kitchen, which is typically where you're going to have the most congregation in a house, where people are going to have a beer or a drink or whatever. And I can see on an app displayed exactly how much noise is being made in my house now. And, I can see how technology could potentially in the future be something that gets written into this type of ordinance, because if everybody who lived next door to a big house that is potentially having a lot of parties, if they had this, I think then we would have a lot of good data that says, yeah, this is a problem house, and we can't have this impact on these neighbors.
Sue, so one of the things that I run into...
Can I just respond to
Sure.
something that Belinda said first? What I would counter to what you said about city living is, yes, it's city living, but you are unlikely to be walking in and out of your house with roller bags at 3 a.m. every 3 days, and locking your car, bumping the horn every 3 days. You're not going to be having your daughter's wedding every weekend.
Belinda, you'd admit there's like a predictability about normal neighborhoods.
Yes, absolutely. But my neighbors did actually complain to me when I first moved in that they had noticed the noise levels increase. This was even before I started Airbnb, and I thought to myself, wonder why? Am I being really noisy or something? And then I realized, I am a community person. I entertain. I have people over for meetings, and I realized that they had lived next door for 10 years next to an old man that died in the home, and he didn't do anything. And so they had an expectation of very low noise levels. And then when I came in, yes. But to Sue's point, I get it. And I do feel for a lot of people. I understand if I was living next to a house that was having a wedding every weekend, yeah, that's not okay.
Sue?
Well, I would just say, it's the scale of the thing. It's, you have to get up and go to work in the morning. You have a business to run. Even if you're being rowdy and you entertain a lot, you're probably like me. We take it inside. I entertain a lot too, but I entertain inside because I don't want to disrupt my neighbors. I have a commitment to my neighbors. On our street, last weekend we had a progressive dinner party. We had 25 of the neighborhood, and the neighbors in, and we went from 3 houses, one for appetizers, one for main course, and my house for dessert. But we did that inside, and we do that once a year. We don't do it every day of the week. And I think that's partly what's so difficult about this, is that if you're somebody renting a vacation rental, I mean, they're great. You go there, you have your own space, you do what you want, and you're there for 3 days or a week, and it's 3 days or a week out of your life. And then you go back to your normal, regular life. But for the people that live next door to these things, it's every day of their life. And I think that's why it's such a difficult issue for people too, is that the perspective of the neighbors and the perspective of the people that rent these things is entirely different.
Let me ask you though, one of the things I struggle with is let's say there was a ban, how in the world would you make sure that a person going into that home is not allowed to be there, or is I have people coming into my home all the time or whatever. It's like I don't want my neighbors to be like checking people's IDs to see if they are owner occupied or whatever. How is this? Is it complaint based? What's the vision of how this might work out?
Well, the reason why we have so many of these is that there are rental platforms that people advertise on.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're advertising on a rental platform, then that's one way to enforce it. If they're not allowed and there's an advertisement, you have a problem, right?
That would be
listen, I don't want to be there. I don't want to be the old lady drawing the curtain across and peering out on the street, looking at what's going in and out across the street from me. I don't want to be that person.
And Tom, you used to be part of San Diego Safe San Diego Neighborhoods. You are no longer part of it. Is it because you wanted to pursue more of a compromise in this space?
Exactly. For a lot of years, we tried to have the municipal code enforced, and in December of 2016. City Council members Sherry Leitner and Lori Zaff fielded that proposal, and it failed 7-2 on City Council, on the City Council vote, and we were a little surprised by that. And as I kept talking to the City Council members, I didn't see the political will to have the code enforced, the law enforced, which to me is very sad, but that's the reality. And then on September 18th, Chris Ward announced his proposal, and that is Armageddon to me. That at that point, fun and games end, because his proposal for 3 investors means the end of neighborhoods as we know them. And I tried, as president of Safe San Diego Neighborhoods, to persuade them to come to a situation where we would deal with the political reality as it is, rather than holding out for the best solution, for which there was no political will. So it's simply a question of strategy. I still agree in my heart with their position. I think it's the right position, but the strategy, it's a question of strategy.
All right, I'll finish. Everybody gets one last chance to talk. Sue, what would you want to say? You good?
Is this my last chance?
Sure. Yeah.
Well, I would just emphasize that when there were just a few short-term rentals, that it wasn't a big deal. But I think what concerns me is the growth rate, which is exponential. And we see that kind of growth rate in nature with bacteria and cancer, that very rapid increase. And there's no signs that it's leveling off. So in the next couple of years, the number of new conversions to whole house rentals, if these trends continue, will exceed the number of new housing units built in San Diego on a yearly basis. That's new conversions. So we'll be in a net loss of housing because of short-term rentals. We're not there yet, but we could be there. And that's whole house full-time short-term rentals.
Belinda?
Let's get the data. And
we agree on that.
We do. And let's have fair, clear regulation. And let's agree to keep revisiting it. If it's not going away, let's agree that Airbnb is not going away. I think we all agree on that. So let's regulate it and let's get the data.
John?
I'd touch on the commercial aspect of it. This comes up often, and we're not talking about a brake shop next door to a residential home. We're not talking about a restaurant next door to a residential home. Long-term rentals are a commercial activity. Landlords don't rent their home to lose money out of the goodness of their heart. They do it as an investment. Similar with short-term rentals. And hosts like myself, if I post it for $100, $97 of that comes to me. Some of it goes to my housekeeper. Some of it goes to improve the property. Airbnb takes $3 out of that $100. The main beneficiaries are the many thousands of San Diegans getting that money rather than it going to Hilton or Marriott or other places and mostly leaving the community. Similarly, San Diego has done a lot of things to encourage commerce at home. We loosened the home-based business rules a couple of years ago. I read one article that said San Diego has the highest percentage of telecommute workers in the nation, 7.5% approximately of people working from home. That is a commercial activity. It's packages, it's people coming for appointments, etc. And it's a good thing. It's good to see entrepreneurship. It's good to have economic growth. And especially when it's doing so for people all across the spectrum, apartment dwellers, condo owners, property owners, or even renters. And I think that's really important. It's meaningful money. We don't get up in the morning and go to work to be away from our kids because we like it. We do it because it's a necessity. And yeah, hopefully we like our job as well, but we don't like it all the time. We do it because we need to do it to make ends meet.
All right, I will give one chance to rebut, Tom and Sue,
no.
and then you guys can all do one last thing.
Oh, I thought I wanted one chance to have
Yes.
last word. You had asked before, Scott, about housing and whether that was just something to draw people into this issue. Let me give you two examples of why it isn't it. I go to so many meetings, town council meetings, and I see young people that are struggling to get a place in this pricey housing market that we have. The house next to me has been on the market for a couple of years. It's not advertised as a house. It's advertised as a proven investment. Redfin, the average monthly vacation rental income is $9,782.27. That comes out to about $118,000 a year. When a young family tries to go and buy that house, they have to compete against an investor who has a six-figure income year after year after year. There is no way that young family can get that house. That's not right. And we have to make sure that is not encouraged by even more investment. Redfin did a study. In 2012, 20% of the homes in San Diego were affordable for middle-class African-American and Hispanic families. 2016, that figure had dropped to 5.6%. If Chris Ward's proposal goes through, that figure will go to almost nothing, I believe. I am personally offended by that. Call it reverse NIMBYism if you want, but I think every kid in this neighborhood, in this city, should have a fair chance at getting housing. And having that figure drop below 5% towards zero is not good.
Well, there is a YIMBY movement in town that does advocate for more building and construction of homes. Thank you all for coming in. I know this is a sensitive issue. We could probably talk for another hour, but I really appreciate your time, and we'll see what happens next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.
The Voice of San Diego podcast is part of the Voice of San Diego podcast network. Visit voiceofsandiego.org/podcast to learn more about the Cura Chaos show about movers and shakers on both sides of the border, Beer Talk Radio, our business shows Startup Vault and I Made It in San Diego, and the rest of the shows in the network. If you like the show, go to voiceofsandiego.org and click the donate button. Or if you'd like to sponsor it, contact me at kinsey@vosd.org. That's KINSEE@vosd.org.